Welcome to Hurt at Work, a Kentucky workers' comp podcast. Today, Louisville workers' compensation attorney Scott Scheynost is going to provide helpful information, tips, and advice for injured workers and their families. Scott's goal is to help you to maximize the benefits you receive. If working's got you hurting, sit back and listen to Scott address topics that matter to you. Scott, welcome back. We are going to talk about a workers' comp issue related to lower back injuries, and these are fairly common for you, aren't they?
Yes, the lumbar spine. That seems to be the biggest part of a workers' compensation practice is claims dealing with lumbar spine injuries.
So you start at the top of the spine, you've got the cervix, and then the middle is kind of the thoracic, right? And then lumbar is that lower back.
Lumbar, yes.
Yeah.
They call them L5, S1. It stops, I guess, at the sacroiliac joint. But if they start talking about L4, L3 problems in your back, they're talking about the lumbar area, and that carries a lot of the weight. And what's really interesting to me is somebody that wasn't schooled as a doctor is that a lumbar injury will actually show up sometime in your legs.
Really?
Even though you hurt your back, you may actually not know it until your legs start hurting because you got nerves that go down your spine through the lumbar area, and when you hurt your lumbar vertebrae disc, it puts pressure on the spine, on those nerves that go down into your legs. So what's really weird is somebody comes in saying, I got this bad leg pain, and go, well, you hurt your back, and my leg hurts. Well,
yeah,
it's your
but
back
it came
that's
from
causing it. Yeah,
right. Symptom versus cause, right?
Yeah, and when I was a young attorney, it took me about a year to figure out that the anatomy is not something that I know intuitively, and I've got to pull out the books and study all this stuff and. How a lumbar back problem can cause problem down in your toes and a drop foot and an inability to walk. That was just really weird to me. And then after you do it for a while, when somebody comes in and starts talking about where the injury or the pain is in their leg, you can almost diagnose what part of the back got injured, L3, L4, L5. Now, I'm not a doctor. You don't want me doing the operation on it. I'm sure if the doctor out there is listening to this, he's going to be laughing at me like, oh, yes, this is how we do it. But lumbar injuries are really important in a workers' comp standpoint because they're very significant. And you really only have one back. And in general, as we get older, the back's not going to get better. It's usually going to deteriorate.
Yeah, and that's natural.
It's just natural. It's a natural aging process. But what happens is work accelerates the natural aging process. And that acceleration from work of the natural aging process makes it work-related. So even though you may have degenerative problems in your back, and I've seen papers that say anybody over 25 years old is going to have some kind of degenerative problem in their back of some sort. Even though most of the population has degenerative problems in their backs, if you do a type of work that accelerates that degenerative problem, if you have a physical demanding job that causes you to move your back and carry things all day long, you're probably going to accelerate that degeneration, and it's going to make it work related. So even if you don't have a specific trauma, even if that forklift didn't run into you and knock you over, if you do this job your entire life and you're lifting stuff every day, that's basically going to wear your back out. And because it wears your back out, even though there's not one specific trauma, it is still work-related. Now, what I see is the biggest problem when I talk to folks that have lumbar back injuries is nobody believes them. There's no blood coming out of a vein. They didn't get hit in the head. There's not a bruise there. They didn't get drugged down the hall. There's not scratches and abrasions. They look normal to their boss.
Yeah, it's an invisible injury.
And they can't move, but their boss thinks they're a gold bricker. He's okay, blah, blah, blah. But until the boss has had the injury, and this has actually occurred, and even with claims adjusters, until they've gone through it, they don't understand it. And I think it's hard for a lot of folks that have this injury to explain it to somebody what's going on because that person doesn't see the injury. It took me a couple of years to learn anatomy, and I'm still not that great at it, but I bet your boss knows it even worse than I do, and they don't understand any of this stuff we just talked about how a problem in your lumbar back can actually cause problems in your legs. So a lot of people that have these lumbar back injuries, not only do you have the injury, but you also got the problem of dealing with it at work and your boss and your supervisor who doesn't want to report it and thinks you're gold bricking. And that's a hurdle you got to overcome. I've had several folks, it happens, seems like once or twice every 2 months, somebody comes in and they work for an employer, and the employer won't even report the injury because they don't think they're hurt. And they're hoping it'll go away or something like that. Well, it's important if you've had a lumbar back injury to get that reported. It's important for them to get the claims process going. And this seems to be a bigger problem with smaller employers that don't know how things work.
Well, let me ask you that. I mean, that's really interesting. So I'm on the job. I'm injured, and Kentucky law says you have to notify your employer. So you take it to your supervisor and say, hey, I got injured, I did this, and they don't want to do anything with it. What recourse do you have at that point?
Usually you have to call me. There's a couple other ways to get around it. First of all, you've done what you're supposed to by giving your employer notice of the injury. So you've done your duty. Now it's up to your employer to do something about it. Normally what happens is the employer is supposed to turn it into the workers' comp carrier, and this is a problem. A lot of bosses, they get paid a safety bonus for not having any injuries. They don't have an incentive to report an injury. A lot of smaller companies, they know they've got to pay the workers' comp insurance carrier money, and they know that rate's going to go up if they have an injury. So they've got another incentive not to pay it or not to report it. And occasionally, some employers don't have workers' compensation.
Right.
And I've heard them, we'll pay for the doctor's visit, we'll pay for that, and it never gets paid.
A couple episodes ago, we actually talked about what happens if your employer doesn't have active coverage, and I'll put a link in the show notes to that episode. I mean, it's some surprising answers there.
Yeah, but getting back to this, it's important for you to report the injury. If you don't think you're being treated right, you need to make sure you have a calendar where you write down who you reported it to and what you said.
Put a date on it.
Exact date on it, yeah, because you may have to use that later on. Now, if they don't do anything about this injury, lower back or anything else, you've only got a couple of options. You can ask them nicely. If they're not going to do anything, they're not going to do anything. Sometimes, if you don't want to get an attorney involved, then you can call the Kentucky Department of Workers' Claims. And they have a number. I just know their switchboard number. It's 502-564-5550. You can call that number and speak to a workers' comp specialist. And they can actually bypass your employer and go straight to the workers' comp carrier. All the information on the workers' comp carrier is contained at the Kentucky Department of Workers' Claims, and they have access to it there. And the workers' comp specialist can actually do an end run around your employer and report the injury. The problem there is that generally the workers' comp carrier is not going to do anything until they get a formal report from your employer. They're not going to do anything until they actually get a report. But that'll jumpstart the process. The Department of Workers' Claims can tell the carrier, we're going to fine you for not doing stuff. If they want to be very aggressive about it, they can get everybody scared and they get the thing going. And a lot of times that does get it going. And you've got your claim reported. You can now get it investigated. Hopefully you're getting your medical treatment. But if it doesn't work, then you basically have to file a claim on your own or get an attorney involved in it.
Well, what if I'm nervous about, okay, my supervisor said he's not going to turn in the claim. He's not going to report it. And then I go around them, and I'm worried about them retaliating. What happens?
There are laws that prevent retaliation, and that sometimes is a bigger case than the workers' comp claim itself. But there are specific laws that prevent retaliation. And, if you're working for an employer that does that kind of stuff, first of all, there's these specific laws that prevent you, but secondly, you don't need to be working for that employer. And what you're doing, you have to make a decision. Is my health more important than this company? And it has to be. This is your health, how you provide for you and your family. And it's a hard decision. Most people don't want to go against their boss. Most people want to comply with what they're told to do. My experience is, people really actually detest filing a workers' comp claim for different reasons. They don't want to mess with the system. I don't think I've ever seen anybody enjoy going through the process. And it's not because we try to make it unfavorable, but it's just a process you got to go through that you don't want to have to if you don't need to. But, if your employer is giving you grief over this, there's a reason, and it's usually to save themselves money or the supervisor's bonus or something like that. And you've got to make that conscious decision, is my health and the well-being of my family more important than this company's safety bonus?
Right. And generally that answer is yes.
It has to be. And if you want to let him get his bonus so you don't get your medical treatment and can't work the rest of your life, that's your business. But at some point, you've got to make that conscious decision that you have to look out for yourself. A lot of these folks on the other side know how the system works. They have had other workers' comp claims, especially the adjusters. It's like swimming with the sharks. They're steering you to doctors and things like that they know will help them. It's important for you to have somebody on your side, and I guess that's where we come in on this. But getting back to the lumbar back fusion and all this stuff that has an impact on somebody's life, the ability to get treatment is very important. And in Kentucky, you have a right to pick your doctor out. And if you've got the claim jump-started, if you've got the workers' comp carrier involved in it, usually one of the first things that they're going to do is try to send you to a specific doctor to treat you. And there's a reason for that. That doctor is generally going to give you less treatment, less frequently, and probably less costly treatment than maybe a doctor that you picked out if you went to your family doctor, or if you just picked out an orthopedic surgeon in the phone book.
And it's pretty easy to understand why the, quote, company doctor wants to give you a lower level of care and try to get you back, even though you may not be ready to go.
The delay is the friend of the workers' comp carrier. If they can delay your claim by sending you to a doctor who does not order injections, or does not order an MRI, or does not order surgery, if they can delay this just to see if physical therapy works for 6 months, because that's a lot cheaper than all the other things, and you decide to quit and go somewhere else, they just saved a ton of money. Delay is their friend. Delay is not your friend if you want to get better. If you want to sit in pain for another 6 months where your family doctor would have ordered the treatment that resolves this, you can do that. But in general, the things that will fix you may cost money, and in general, the company doctor seems to be less inclined to go through all that treatment, or as fast as it should. And in Kentucky, you have the right to pick your doctor, and that's probably the best thing you could ever do for yourself, is to go to your doctor, tell them what your problem is, get that treatment from your doctor that you trust, not the company doctor, and you can get better sooner, usually with a little bit better level of care, in my opinion.
No, that's it's something that people don't really understand. They think, well, the company's going to take care of me. Once you sustain an injury, in some cases, it's not always like that.
Well, it's a dollar. It's a dollar issue for most companies and their workers' comp carriers, and some companies I have seen really do take care of their employees. And if you're at one of those companies, you probably know it. But a lot of times, what happens is the company turns it over to the third-party workers' comp carrier, who has a different boss. The workers' comp adjuster or supervisor is not the same as your supervisor.
And this is basically the claims adjuster, the guy working
Correct.
for the insurance agent.
And their boss likes them to save money, not make you happy, not get you fixed better. If they can close your claim out quicker with less money, then that workers' comp adjuster is going to get a supervisor. You're not going to, but he or she will. So they have an incentive to spend less on your case, make their boss happy, as opposed to making you happy and better. And you have to be a little bit proactive in here. I think most people know when they're not being treated right. I think most people know when they got a problem and the doctor's not really paying attention to them. And I think almost invariably you're always better off going to your own doctor, or at least somebody you pick, than somebody that's been given to you by the company. And the company says a lot of times, you have to go to this doctor. No, that's not the law in Kentucky. But I hear that at least once a week. They said I had to go there. No. And sometimes the supervisor's told that. And in some states, they can tell you what doctor to go to. For instance, Indiana can tell you what doctor to go to.
Right. But under Kentucky law, the worker has the right to choose his or her own doctor.
Correct. And that's another thing, too, is I deal with adjusters that work in 4 or 5 states sometimes. And they're used to being able to tell people in Indiana they get to go to the doctor they pick. Well, that's not the law in Kentucky, and the adjuster is not an attorney. They don't really understand the differences in law. They've got a computer that just punches numbers out, and they put things in it all day long. But it's important to sit down and go over some of these really basic tenets that can have a big impact later on down the road, like picking out the doctor, the medical treatment you're going to have, things like that, your ability to work down the road. All these things can be really big in a lower back case. And lower back cases seem to have more of an impact than just about anything else, especially with a physically demanding job. Because no matter what you do, you're going to be using that back to walk around, to pick up stuff, to carry things.
Well, in the last episode, episode 15, we talked about reopening. And with a back injury, I would think, as you get a little bit older, the need to reopen that case. Do you want to touch on that real quick? Again, we covered this in depth in the previous episode, but this might be a good time to mention it.
First of all, in Kentucky, you get medical treatment for the rest of your life if you preserve that right. And there's a couple ways to do that we're not going to get into right now. And that also includes back treatment, but that's separate from a right to reopen your claim to get more money. So let's say that you have a back sprain in Kentucky, and that might be an 8% impairment rating underneath the guides we use, and you get money based on this 8% impairment rating. If that back sprain is not resolved and has accelerated arthritis in your back, or accelerated a disc problem, and that disc problem results in a discectomy, you may have a surgery that increases your impairment rating from 8 to 12%. And in Kentucky, there's a big jump between 10 and 11. So a 12% rating might be almost as much as an 8. Plus, we also look at how you're able to go back to work at your old job. So if you've had a back sprain and then you go settle your case or get it resolved, and then later on you have a surgery, if you reopen your claim within 4 years, you can get additional money, and that additional money can be really significant. And then there's other back problems that can result in reopenings too. For instance, if somebody's already had the back surgery or discectomy, sometimes that accelerates arthritis and other problems in the back, and they may end up having a fusion. And that discectomy may have been a 12% impairment rating. Well, may now be a 25% impairment rating. And in addition to that impairment rating, usually when you have more back treatment, your ability to work decreases dramatically. So your ability to go back to work at your old job also decreases, and that's another factor we look at, is whether or not you can do your old job. So not only is your impairment rating increased, but also your ability to work has decreased, and both of those generally tend to get you a lot more money in Kentucky than what you really originally had. So back cases don't normally get better over time. As we all get older, we usually develop arthritis and other problems in the back. The disc space between the vertebrae tends to deteriorate for different reasons because of age and stuff like that. So your ability to, use your back like you did before decreases generally over time. I don't know anybody has a better back at age 50 than they did at 25. So the back is almost always invariably going to get worse over time. And if you've ever had a back injury, your chances of looking at this to reopen the claim increase over time, especially the more treatment that you've had. But the back injury is just the basis of all our body, what we do at work most of the time. We got to use our hands, we got to use our legs, but we can't use our hands without the back or the legs, and we can't walk around or we can't carry stuff. And unless you've got a sit-down job that doesn't require any use of the back, which is actually pretty rare, even people that work on a computer all day are going to be moving around, picking up files, doing stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there are some people that probably don't use their back at all. But the back, I've had people at call centers that fell over cords at work, end up getting cervical fusions because of that, because they hit their head on something. It can occur any place, and it seems to be more important than just any other injury. You've got two knees, you've got two hands, two eyes, but you've only got one back. And everything seems to flow through the back for work. So if you've hurt your back, it's going to have some kind of impact on your ability to work generally. Hopefully not much, but the bigger the impact, the more you need to look at this, and more you need to look at the treatment you're going to have and how this is going to impact your ability to work down the road.
And Scott, if somebody's listening to this and says, you know what, I did sustain a back injury. I lifted something, I heard a pop, or something just doesn't feel right, or maybe I had to go to the doctor, and now I'm sitting here going, I don't know what to do. They need to talk to a workers' comp attorney, especially if this happened, at work, obviously. How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, they can call me at 502-937-5287, 502-937-5287.
And your office is right there on Dixie Highway. They can leave a voicemail, or they can actually go to the website, and there's a contact form right there on the website they can fill out, and you or your staff will get right back to them. That website, by the way, is Scheynost Law. That's spelled SCHEYNOST law.com.
Right. Again, you have to be able to spell Scheynost. That seems to be the hard part. But that will come to my website. We'll try to answer your calls. We'll try to respond to your emails. We also have a chat service on the website, too, and we'll be able to communicate with you that way. But again, these back issues, you mentioned the pop in your back. That's the typical workers' comp claim. That pop's usually an indication of a herniated disc in the back that puts pressure on the spine. It causes a problem down their leg. And once a month, somebody says, I felt a pop in my back, and all of a sudden there's this burning sensation down my leg. That is probably the typical workers' compensation claim. If you've ever felt a pop in your back, especially one associated with pain, you really need to talk to somebody because this has some important impacts for the rest of your life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And unfortunately, these can be work ending. Some of these right. back problems, right. that accelerate with age and just you're limited in your ability to either come back to the same job, perform right. the same type of work. You may be, unfortunately, looking at a career-ending injury, and that workers' comp claim becomes even more important at that time.
Right, and in addition to workers' comp, there may be other things involved in this. You may need to look at things like Social Security disability, stuff like that might also have an impact. And in Kentucky, we have a thing called vocational rehabilitation where you can get retrained to do other jobs, which tends to be a lot harder to get the older we get, which is when most people have the back problems. But there's other things out there besides the monetary benefits from workers' compensation that you need to talk to an attorney about, especially if you're older, over 45, 50, 55, and you have a back problem and been doing physical labor all your life. Not only do you have a potential workers' comp claim, but you also may have a Social Security disability insurance claim that I'm not going to get into on the phone, but that's something else to look at. And again, if you're younger and have a back problem, I've actually had folks that had a truck driver one time fell off a truck and hurt his back. He ended up going to nursing school and actually became a nurse and ended up getting a position that was pretty good. And he got vocational rehabilitation. It actually worked out well for him. So sometimes there is a success story with that. But again, this is a big thing. The more it hurts, the worse it's probably going to be, and the more of an impact it's going to be on your life. And we handle these on a contingency fee basis.
And what does that mean?
That means that we don't charge you any money unless we can get money for you. That means your first call is free. That means all your calls are basically free unless we get money for you. And the way we handle these in Kentucky on a contingency fee is our fee is capped at no more than 20% and no more than $18,000. And there's some other limits in there. But we charge a fee. We don't charge unless we get money for you. We may incur expenses, and we may have to pay doctors for reports or medical records or other things like that. And those will be deducted from your claim at the end. But our fee is not paid unless we get something for you. It doesn't cost anything to call me. I'm not going to charge you by the hour. If you've got questions, you can call me 5 times. And I've had this happen before where we talk to people. I like to talk. But I'm not going to charge a fee unless we're representing you and unless we can get you money. So it's no obligation. Happy to talk to you on the phone. Happy to talk a little bit on the internet or meet you in person, whatever is most convenient for you. But if you think you've had a back surgery and you think it's serious, please see me or some other attorney about it so we can figure out what's going on and maybe find something that can help you with this.
Scott, I tell you what, that's great advice, and I hope people take advantage of that advice. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can get hurt at work. There are a lot of things that can impact your ability to earn a living. And as the economy gets a little dicey, as all these other factors come into play, you need to kind of protect yourself. And sometimes speaking to Scott Scheynost is a good place to start because he'll be able to talk to you about what happened. He'll be able to talk to you about, in his experience, what typically will happen should we decide to file a claim, and kind of give you a good idea of how it's going to play out and what has to happen for you to move forward.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to people. Give me a call. Staff is happy to talk to you. We've handled several back cases over the last 30 years. I'm sure we'll handle some more. I'm waiting to see what technology brings for back cases. I've heard of laser surgery and things like that. I've got a disc replacement going on right now. But the general practice for most back surgeries are we'll try some physical therapy first to see if that helps because that's basically the cheapest. We'll try some injections next to see if that helps because that's just a little bit more than physical therapy, but not as much as the next thing, which is usually an MRI. And then if the MRI doesn't work, we'll try surgery, which is a lot more expensive. So most doctors will follow that pattern in trying to treat you. Some will take a little bit longer than others. I think it's in everybody's best interest to see their family doctor or somebody they trust to get that treatment they need sooner, not later. It's in the companies and insurance companies' best interest to delay all this stuff, see how long physical therapy works, come up with another excuse not to pay something. But it's in your best interest to get this treatment as soon as possible. Number one, to get better. Number two, to get back to what you were doing before. And number three, if, God forbid, it is a serious injury, at least you got that going and know where it's going real fast, too.
Yeah, and sometimes that's peace of mind and at least a little bit more financial security coming your way.
That's yes, and for you and your family, too. And, these things can have a big impact on somebody's life and their family's life and ability to do things. And the sooner you get it resolved, the sooner life is a little bit better to deal with.
That makes a lot of sense. Scott, I want to thank you for your time. And if you've been listening to this episode, I want to thank you for your time as well. And if you know somebody that maybe is in that situation, feel free to share this episode with them. And we encourage you definitely to call Scott Scheynost out on Dixie Highway for your Kentucky workers' comp claim. Scott, thanks again. And we'll talk to you in about 2 weeks.
Enjoyed talking to you, Jim. Look forward to it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Hurt at Work. Scott will be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. For more information, be sure to visit ScheynostLaw.com. That's SCHEYNOST law.com. You can also follow Scott's Workers' Comp office on Facebook. Until next time, be safe and remember, Scott's ready to help, especially when you and your family need it the most.